Let's turn this thing on and get started. Okay. Can you hear me now? How about over here? Can you hear me now? So we're not using AT&T. Good. So I will channel Christopher Hitchens and take care of the starting paperwork about cell phones in a public event. Hitchens' modification of the 10 Commandments, his 9th commandment. Turn off thy fucking cell phone. You can have no idea how uninterested we are in your conversation. How's that? And I have a joke too. I don't know if the guy ever said, make me one with everything. Can you hear this okay? Yeah. I don't know if anybody ever said, make me one with everything, but I do know that when Dorothy Parker was asked why she doesn't go to church on Sunday morning, she said, because I'm too fucking busy and vice versa. 1, 2, got it. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about the believing brain, and in the context of that, my first book you mentioned was Why People Believe Weird Things. So with this book I was interested in why people believe things, full stop. That is not just the weird stuff, because we can all think of weird things that other people believe, but of course that we don't believe. So I got to thinking about how do beliefs get formed in the first place in general, but just to kind of give us a wake-up reminder of the percentages of weird things that people do believe. Miracles, 76%, heaven, 75%, Jesus is Son or Son of God, 73%, angels, 72%, survival of the soul after death, 71%, resurrection of Christ, 70%, hell, 61%. Now, back to heaven was 75%, hell 61%. So there's a cognitive bias there already, sort of the optimism bias or the over-optimism bias that it's going to be good. So why do people believe these things? Okay, so I start off with constructing a model of how we form beliefs in the first place that gets back to my roots as a sort of a behavioral psychologist or behavioral Skinnerian type principles of just connecting the dots, connecting A to B. And basically all organisms do this, from C. elegans to H. sapiens. It's the process of just finding some pattern or connection. So my thought experiment is, imagine you're a hominid on the plains of Africa 3.5 million years ago. Your name is Lucy. You know, Lucy the... Yeah, okay, good, good. You know, there's some places they don't really get this at all. And you hear a rustle in the grass. Is it a dangerous predator or is it just the wind? So if you assume that the rustle in the grass is a dangerous predator, and it turns out it's just the wind, you've made a type 1 error, a false positive. But no harm, that's a low-cost error to make. But if you believe that the rustle in the grass is just the wind, and it turns out it's a dangerous predator, you're lunch. Congratulations, you've just been given a Darwin Award for taking yourself out of the gene pool early, before reproducing. And we are the descendants of those who are more likely to make type 1 errors versus type 2 errors. False positives rather than false negatives. The default rule of thumb is just believe all rustles in the grass are dangerous predators instead of just the wind, because as a calculation for cost-benefit analysis of making errors, those are the less costly errors of the kinds that are more likely to be made. Those are called superstitions or magical thinking. That is, you think of Pavlov's dog, you ring the bell, you give him some food, and he salivates, you ring the bell, you give him some food, and he salivates, you ring the bell, and he salivates. He's associated A, the bell, with B, food, and he salivates, so that's an association made there. And that's a kind of a connection. And we know that the brain actually gets rewired. These neural pathways get reinforced with dopamine when you learn something new and it feels good to learn something or be positively reinforced, like the rat pressing the bar associates the bar with the food. So on. This is all just really, really basic. All animals do it because they have to survive. The brain can store so much information to deal with an ever-changing environment. So brains are the next step to dealing with always changing environments for survival. So, but the problem is we don't have a baloney detection module in our brain to help us tell the difference between true patterns and false patterns. So we're not very good at it. So, so like the question is, why can't you just sit there in the grass waiting to collect more data? Is it the wind or is it the dangerous predator? Because sitting there waiting to gather more data will also make you lunch and get you a Darwin Award. So you have to make snap decisions, rapid fire, rapid cognition, rapid decisions quickly. And it's better to make the one kind of error than the other kind of error, so this is the baggage. In other words, we believe weird things because we have to believe things. And we can't always tell the difference, and there's no time to make those calculations. So evolution has given us all these sort of cognitive heuristic shortcuts on assuming certain things to be real and not, and so on. So from an evolutionary perspective, this makes all kinds of sense. We will always make errors in our thinking. Like the poor, we will always have the error-prone humans with us, because we're all part of that. So that's the basis of the learning process that way. And then I introduce a second concept that I call patternicity, the tendency to find meaningful patterns in both meaningful and meaningless noise. And the second concept I introduce is agenticity, the tendency to infuse those patterns with intentional agents. Agents that are invisible, hidden, at work, operating in the nooks and crannies of society, behind the boulders, in the clouds, you know, hidden in the hidden forces there, pulling the strings, making things work. We just make those kinds of assumptions. And if you think back on our thought experiment, what's the difference between the wind and a dangerous predator? The wind is an inanimate force. A dangerous predator is an intentional agent. It's an agent who intends to eat me, and that can't be good. So we do, because we have big brains, we can actually even call it things and think about what they are. And so those, I think, then become the basis for belief in ghosts and gods and demons and angels and aliens and hidden forces. It's the basis of spiritism and animism and polytheism and monotheism, even the belief in aliens and extraterrestrials who are these sort of on-high gods and beings coming down. Conspiracies of hidden forces pulling the strings to, you know, run the world, these sorts of things. Our brains just go to that place naturally. And it's hard to resist that process. So let's go through a bunch of these different subjects that I cover. I'll just sort of rapid fire through the different chapters. The afterlife, God, aliens, conspiracies, and then I want to talk about politics and economic ideology, because those are also beliefs. So, well, let's start with the afterlife. Imagine yourself dead. What do you see? Yeah, well, yeah, you're rationalists. You've already thought about this. Okay. The average person says something like, oh, I can see my funeral and there's nice flowers and the people are around my casket and there's my body and so on. See, they're picturing something that you would not see, of course, because there's still an observer in the scene. Okay, when you're dead, there's no observer in the scene. You're not observing anything, right? It would be no different than saying, imagine what the world was like before you were born. What do you see? And it'd be like, what are you talking about? Nothing. There is no world before I'm born. Right, it's the same thing. But cognitively, we cannot picture not existing any more than we can picture there being no universe at all. I mean, picture it, you sort of think, oh yeah, I see a bunch of... No, you can't see anything. There's nothing to see. Right? So it's the same process. So it's a paradox that our brains are faced with that leads us to imagine, well, there must be something else because we're natural-born dualists. So almost everybody from 6 months of age all the way through pretty much everywhere in the world believes that there are two substances in the universe, body and soul, brain and mind, corporeal and incorporeal, matter and non-matter, or immaterial matter, spirit, some kind of stuff. There's two substances in the world. That just comes naturally. We get it when we watch films like Freaky Friday, when Jamie Lee Curtis and Lindsay Lohan switch bodies. And the teenage girl is now in the corporate boardroom, and the corporate mom is now in high school with the teenage girls, and hilarity ensues. And it's a funny movie. I really like this movie. It's a remake from the previous one. Anyway, and we get it because we can imagine how that could happen. That, yeah, I change places. Wait a minute. What's changing places? What's going over to the other body? Well, you know, your soul's pattern, memories. No, that doesn't happen. It can't happen. In fact, in terms of organ donations, a brain donation is the one organ donation where you want to be the donor, not the recipient. Because if you're the recipient, you're somebody else. Your body's just been inhabited by somebody else, right? I mean, we have some really serious issues with identity. Even in scientific circles. When I just went to the Singularity Summit in New York this last fall with Ray Kurzweil and all the great singularitarians, and how if you follow the curves of Moore's law applied to computers and technology and DNA sequencing and cloning and all this stuff, we're going to achieve the ability to be immortal by 2030. This is what they think. And you'll be able to download all your memories into a computer. And so essentially, because the electric meat of our brains is only good for a few decades, and then it has all sorts of problems. But a good silicon-based computer, this could last for hundreds of years or thousands of years. What could go wrong? Like Microsoft, and so, I mean, Apple computers never have problems. Okay, well that's a separate issue. But they project those curves out. And imagine that you could clone your body and then take the computer that has all your memories and everything that ever happened that is you and put it back into this cloned body, and there you go. No, that's not you. It's your twin that just happens to have the same memories of you. So just think about a thought experiment for a minute. So let's say this is possible. This is in principle possible. Let's say within, I don't think it's 2030. I think it's more like 25-25 or 35-35 or maybe even 95-95 when man is still alive. Anyway, so it's not going to happen in our lifetime. I just know it, and I'm going to be so pissed if they achieve immortality right after I die, and I missed it by that much. So picture, so you're in a plane on a trip, and a plane goes down. Boom, you're gone, you're dead. And your spouse gets the word that you've crashed and died. And so the spouse calls the cloning place and they rebuild your body, and they call the little time machine, like the Apple time machine you can get that back up your hard drive, which you're supposed to do every 3 days or so. So you downloaded it, you uploaded everything 2 days ago, so it's all fresh, and you put it into the clone body, and you go home. And your spouse is like, "Hi, honey." It's like nothing happened, right? And so life continues, you're immortal. No, because what actually happened was the plane didn't go down. There's been a mistake. The pilot pulled it out the last second, you survived, and you go home, and there's this other guy, this other lady in bed with your spouse, and you're like, "Wait a minute, that's not me, I'm right here." And the guy's like, or the woman's like, "No, I'm you. No, you're not me, I'm..." The identity problem, right? So this is not possible. So even the scientific visions of how we can beat immortality, even they don't work. Sorry. This is really, it's a serious identity problem. So this is the problem with the afterlife. It's a paradox. We can't imagine us not being alive, because that's all we know, and it's all our brains can conceive of. And yet, every scenario that you analyze scientifically leads, even the best scientific version of it doesn't work. The only hope would be if you could replace your neurons one by one with nanobots that go in there and reconstruct it into some other material. But there has to be a continuity of consciousness, or else it's just a twin that has your beliefs, and that doesn't get you there. So in the end, we're sort of faced with this: there is no afterlife, so what's the point? Well, that's kind of a separate subject that humanists deal with, but lots of good reasons to continue that we can talk about later over adult beverages or something. But the afterlife doesn't work, but we still believe in it because we have to. And our brains are geared up to be dualists, and we have this capacity for projecting ourselves somewhere else. We can imagine right now being at the beach in Panama City, where I was this morning, and that white sand and the waves, and you could picture yourself there. So we're able to project ourselves dualistically into someplace else, and so that's the basis where this belief in the afterlife comes from. And obviously, where you happen to be born determines which version of the afterlife you believe. Okay, so afterlife.